Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Robert Sullivan had built his life like the houses he constructed, methodically, with attention to every detail, and built to last. At 52, his weathered hands still bore the calluses from his early days swinging hammers, though now he commanded a crew of 30 men and owned Sullivan Construction, the most respected building company in Millbrook County. The irony wasn't lost on him that the woman who was about to tear down everything he'd built had never worked a day of physical labor in her life. Linda Sullivan, née Hartwell, had married him 25 years ago when he was a young contractor with more ambition than money. She'd been a banker's daughter, polished and pretty, who saw potential in the rough-edged man who spoke of building an empire. Back then, her belief in him had felt like fuel. Now, Rob realized it had been an investment she'd been waiting to cash out. Their children, Michael and Rebecca, were seated around the mahogany dining table Rob had crafted himself. At 23 and 21 respectively, they'd grown up privileged, never knowing the hunger that had driven their father from a trailer park to a mansion on Pine Ridge. Michael worked for a tech startup in the city. Rebecca was finishing her senior year at an expensive liberal arts college. Both had inherited their mother's sense of entitlement and their father's stubborn streak, a dangerous combination Rob was about to discover. The Thanksgiving turkey sat carved but largely untouched as Linda cleared her throat, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her wine glass. Rob had noticed the signs for months, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she'd started dressing younger, tighter. He'd hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago, not because he was surprised, but because he was a man who dealt in facts. "I have something important to tell everyone," Linda announced, her voice carrying the rehearsed confidence of someone who'd practiced this speech. "I've decided to sell the house. Troy needs somewhere bigger for his children, and this place has too many memories anyway." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's fork clattered against her plate. Michael's face went through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, realization, then anger. "Troy," Rebecca whispered. "Troy Brennan. He's someone very important to me. We've been together for almost a year now, and I'm ready to start fresh. The house will be listed next week." Rob watched his children's faces, cataloging their reactions like evidence. Michael's jaw tightened. His son had always been protective of what he perceived as his inheritance. Rebecca looked like she might cry, but Rob suspected it was more about the disruption to her comfortable world than any loyalty to him. "Dad," Michael finally managed, looking across the table at his father. Rob had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. He stood slowly, his 6'3" frame unfolding with deliberate calm. 25 years of marriage, and Linda still hadn't learned to read the signs when her husband was at his most dangerous, when he was quiet. "Excuse me," he said simply, walking toward the hallway. He returned less than a minute later with a manila envelope, the kind used for legal documents. Linda was in the middle of explaining how she and Troy had been growing apart from their old lives when Rob placed the envelope beside her plate. "Since we're making announcements," he said, his voice carrying the flat tone that his construction crews knew meant serious trouble was coming. Linda's confidence faltered as she recognized the law firm's letterhead. Her face drained of color as she opened the envelope and scanned the first page. The room was silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock Rob had restored as a wedding gift to himself. "Divorce papers," Linda whispered, the documents trembling in her hands. "Filed this morning," Rob confirmed. "Effective immediately. Since you're so eager to move in with Troy, I thought I'd help expedite the process." But Linda kept reading, and with each page, her face grew paler. "Rob, you can't, the prenup. The prenup you signed says infidelity voids your claim to marital assets. My lawyer assures me that 3 months of documented evidence will hold up quite nicely in court." Michael was reading over his mother's shoulder now, his expression shifting. "Dad, maybe we should all take a step back." "I'm taking a step back," Rob said. "I'm taking several steps back. Your mother has made her choice, and I'm making mine. Rebecca finally found her voice. What about us? This is our home, too. Rob looked at his daughter, really looked at her, saw Linda's entitled expression reflected in features that had once reminded him of his own mother. That depends on whose side you choose, doesn't it? The question hung in the air like smoke. Rob had built his empire by knowing when to cut losses and when to invest. His children would have to prove which category they belonged in. Linda was frantically flipping through pages now. The house. You can't just take the house. I have rights. You had rights, Rob corrected. You forfeited them when you decided to plan your new life behind my back. The house is in my name only, bought with my money, built by my company. You have no claim to it. But Troy's children need. Troy's children aren't my problem. Troy's children have a father, and if he can't provide for them, maybe he shouldn't have been so eager to break up their home to play house with my wife. The word wife came out like something distasteful he needed to spit out. Linda stood abruptly, the legal document scattering. You bastard. You planned this. You've been planning this. The same way you planned to sell my house without telling me. Rob's voice remained level, but his eyes had gone cold. The difference is, I'm better at planning than you are. Michael cleared his throat nervously. Look, maybe everyone just needs to cool down. This is a lot to process on Thanksgiving. There's nothing to process, Rob said, his gaze moving between his children. Your mother has chosen her new family. The question is whether you're part of that family or part of this one, because there isn't going to be any middle ground. Rebecca was crying now, but Rob felt nothing. He'd spent too many years building something for people who were ready to tear it down the moment it became inconvenient. You can't make us choose, she said. I'm not making you choose anything. I'm simply clarifying the terms. Your mother is moving out to start her new life with Troy. Anyone who wants to follow her is welcome to do so. Anyone who stays understands that loyalty means something in this house. Linda grabbed her purse, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. This isn't over, Robert. I know you. I know how you operate. You think you're so smart, but I'm not the same girl who married you. Rob smiled for the first time that evening, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. No, Linda, you're not. You're much worse. As she stormed out, slamming the door behind her, Rob looked at his children. Michael was studying the legal documents, his business mind clearly working through the implications. Rebecca was still crying, but there was something calculating in her eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of her mother. So, Rob said, settling back into his chair, anyone want pie? But he was already thinking 3 moves ahead, the way he'd learned to do in the boxing ring as a teenager, the way he did on every construction site, the way he'd learned to survive. Linda thought she knew how he operated, but she'd never seen him when he stopped playing defense. The envelope had been just the opening move. Chapter 2, Foundations Cracking. The law office of Hendricks, Moore and Associates occupied the top floor of Millbrook's only high-rise, a 12-story monument to the town's modest prosperity that Rob's company had helped build. 3 days after Thanksgiving, Rob sat across from Gerald Hendricks, a thin man whose expensive suits couldn't hide his nervous energy. The prenup is ironclad, Hendricks was saying, shuffling through documents. Your wife's attorney will challenge it, of course, but the evidence you've provided makes their position untenable. The private investigators report the financial records showing she was planning to liquidate joint accounts. It's quite comprehensive. Rob nodded, his attention only partially on the lawyer's words. Through the window, he could see the construction site where his crew was working on the new medical center. Even from 12 stories up, he could identify each man by his movements, the rhythm of their work. Building required trust, coordination, loyalty. Everything his marriage had lacked. There is one complication, Hendricks continued. Your children. What about them? Michael called my office yesterday. He wants to schedule a meeting to discuss the family situation. And Rebecca, well, she's been in contact with your wife's attorney. Rob's jaw tightened. In the 3 days since Linda had moved out, she'd found temporary housing with her sister, while she and Troy looked for something more permanent. The battle lines had been drawn more clearly than he'd anticipated. Michael had tried to play diplomat, calling his father with speeches about healing the family, and finding a way forward that works for everyone. But when Rob had asked point-blank whether his son supported his mother's betrayal, Michael had hedged, talked about understanding both sides. Rebecca had been more direct in her betrayal. She'd told Rob that his reaction was cruel and that she intended to help her mother fight the divorce terms. When Rob had asked if she preferred to move out with Linda, Rebecca had insisted she had a right to stay in her home, regardless of her loyalty. Both of his children, it seemed, had inherited their mother's belief that they could have everything without consequences. Let them schedule their meetings, Rob said, but make sure they understand that sympathy won't change the law. After leaving the lawyer's office, Rob drove to the Blue Collar Bar, a working-class establishment he'd frequented since his early days in construction. The owner, Danny Kowalski, had been a friend for 20 years, the kind of man who understood that some conversations required beer and privacy. Heard about Linda, Danny said without preamble, sliding a bottle across the scarred wooden bar. Can't say I'm surprised. She always struck me as the type who'd trade up if she got the chance. Rob appreciated Danny's bluntness. In his current world of lawyers and family meetings, direct honesty had become rare. What do you know about Troy Brennan? Rob asked. Danny's expression darkened. More than I wish I did. He's been sniffing around town for about 2 years now. Came from somewhere down south, Georgia, I think. Runs some kind of consulting business, but nobody seems to know what he actually consults about. And his kids? 2 boys, maybe 8 and 10. Ex-wife got tired of his wandering eye and took off to California with her new husband. Left the kids with Troy because she said he was their problem now. Danny paused, wiping down a glass. Word is, he's been looking for a woman with money to help him get back on his feet. Guess he found one. Rob absorbed this information, adding it to what his private investigator had uncovered. Troy Brennan was 38, charming in a way that appealed to women Linda's age who felt invisible. He drove a leased BMW, rented a small apartment across town, and had a talent for making women feel young and desired. There's something else, Danny continued, lowering his voice. My nephew Tommy works at the bank. Says Troy's been asking a lot of questions about real estate values in Pine Ridge, specifically about your house. The implication hit Rob like a sledgehammer. Linda wasn't just leaving him for another man. She was leaving him for a man who had targeted her specifically for her assets. The house Rob had designed and built with his own hands was nothing more than a prize to be claimed. That evening, Rob sat in his study, surrounded by the photographs and awards that documented 25 years of building a life. Linda had left most of her things behind, claiming she'd send for them later. But Rob suspected she was hoping he'd weaken, that he'd offer some kind of compromise to keep the family together. She'd never understood that for Rob, loyalty wasn't negotiable. His phone rang, Michael's number. Dad, we need to talk, his son said without greeting. This whole situation is getting out of hand. I agree. When are you moving out? What? Dad, I'm not moving out. This is my home, too. No, Michael. This was your home when you were part of this family. Now you're trying to play both sides, which means you're on neither. That's not fair. I'm trying to help everyone find a solution. There's only one solution. Your mother chose to destroy this family. You can either stand with the family or stand with her destruction of it. It doesn't have to be that black and white. It's exactly that black and white. You think you can stay neutral, keep your comfortable room here while supporting your mother's betrayal. That's not loyalty, son. That's cowardice. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Michael spoke again, his voice had an edge Rob hadn't heard before. You know what, Dad? Maybe Mom was right. Maybe you're impossible to live with. Then don't. Rob hung up and immediately called his lawyer. I want to change the locks, he said when Hendricks answered. Tomorrow. And I want security cameras installed. If anyone who doesn't live here anymore wants their belongings, they can make an appointment. Rob, that might seem excessive. Gerald, my wife is planning to sell my house out from under me to fund her new boyfriend's lifestyle. My children think they can stay neutral while supporting her betrayal. Nothing I do from this point forward will be excessive. As he hung up the phone, Rob realized something had shifted inside him. For 25 years, he'd been building, accommodating, trying to hold things together. Now, he was going to find out what happened when he focused all that energy on tearing something down. Linda and Troy thought they were playing a game where they could have everything they wanted. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated what Rob Sullivan was willing to do to people who betrayed him. And he was just getting started. Chapter 3, The Price of Betrayal. The locksmith finished his work at 7 a.m. sharp, just as Rob had planned. By 8, the security company had installed cameras covering every entrance to the property. Rob stood in his kitchen, drinking coffee and watching the monitors on his tablet as his transformed home became a fortress. He didn't have to wait long for the first test. Rebecca arrived at 9, expecting to let herself in as she had every day of her life. Rob watched through the cameras as she tried her key, then tried again, then began pounding on the door. He let her pound for 5 minutes before answering. "Dad, my key doesn't work," she said, confusion and anger warring in her voice. "That's because it's not your key anymore. This isn't your house anymore." "What are you talking about? I live here." "No, Rebecca, you lived here when you were part of this family. You chose to support your mother's betrayal instead. That has consequences." Rebecca's face went through the same spectrum of emotions Rob had seen Thanksgiving night. Confusion, realization, then fury. "You can't just kick me out. I'm your daughter. You were my daughter. Now you're Linda's ally. If you want a place to live, I suggest you ask Linda to make room in whatever love nest she's building with Troy. This is insane. You can't disown your own children." Rob stepped closer to the doorway, his size and the cold fury in his eyes making Rebecca take an unconscious step back. "Watch me. I'll fight this. I'll get a lawyer." "With what money? Your trust fund was contingent on loyalty to this family. You chose Linda's side, so ask Linda to pay your legal bills." As Rebecca drove away in tears, Rob felt nothing but satisfaction. He'd learned long ago that half measures were worse than no measures. People either respected boundaries or they didn't, and Rebecca had just learned that her father's boundaries had teeth. The phone started ringing an hour later. First Linda, screaming about him punishing innocent children. Then Michael, demanding he stop this insane revenge fantasy. Then Rebecca again, this time from Linda's sister's house, begging him to please be reasonable. Rob let them all go to voicemail. At noon, his private investigator, Sam Morrison, called with an update. Sam was a former cop who'd left the force after 20 years, tired of politics but not investigation. He was thorough, patient, and completely without sentiment. Exactly what Rob needed. "I've got more information on your boy Troy," Sam said. "Turns out he's got quite a history. This is his 4th time pulling this exact same play." "Explain." "He targets middle-aged women going through rough patches in their marriages. Offers excitement. Makes them feel young, then slowly isolates them from their support systems while positioning himself to benefit from their assets. His first mark was a widow in Atlanta. He convinced her to sell her house and invest in his consulting business. She lost everything and ended up in a nursing home. The second was a divorcee in Savannah who he convinced to liquidate her retirement accounts for a business opportunity that never materialized. Rob felt his anger crystallizing into something harder and more useful. And the third, that's where it gets interesting. Her name was Patricia Vance, lived in Augusta, married for 28 years when Troy came along. He used the same playbook, convinced her to leave her husband, sell the house, start fresh. But Patricia's husband was a smarter man than Troy bargained for. What happened? Gerald Vance was a retired federal prosecutor. He did his homework, built a case, and when Troy tried to access Patricia's money, Gerald had him arrested for elder fraud and extortion. Troy spent 18 months in prison. Rob smiled for the first time in days. And Patricia went back to her husband after Troy was arrested. Last I heard, they were still together. Apparently, Gerald Vance believed in forgiveness. I don't. I figured as much. But here's the thing, Rob. Troy learned from his mistakes. He's been more careful since he got out. Whatever you're planning, you'll need to be smarter than he is. After hanging up, Rob sat in his study thinking. Troy Brennan wasn't just an opportunist. He was a predator with a proven system. Linda wasn't his victim. She was his willing accomplice, helping him target Rob's assets, just as she'd targeted Rob himself 25 years ago. The house phone rang. He checked the caller ID. Michael. "You've lost your mind," his son said without preamble. "Rebecca is staying at Mom's sister's place, crying her eyes out." "This isn't what a father does." "This is exactly what a father does," Rob replied. "A father protects what he's built from people who want to destroy it, including his own children, if necessary." "She's 21 years old, Dad. She's confused and scared. She's old enough to choose sides. She chose Linda's. And what about me? Are you going to kick me out too?" Rob considered the question. Michael was trying to play the middle, but unlike Rebecca, he hadn't actively supported Linda. "Not yet. That depends on you, son. Are you planning to help your mother and her boyfriend steal from me?" "Nobody's stealing anything. Troy Brennan is a career con man, Michael. He's done this before to other families. He targets vulnerable women, convinces them to liquidate their assets, then disappears with the money. Your mother isn't his first victim, and she won't be his last." The line went quiet. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice uncertain. "You're sure about this?" "I have documentation. Court records. Police reports. Troy Brennan is a predator, and your mother is helping him target our family's assets." "Jesus. Does Mom know?" "Your mother knows exactly what she's doing. The question is whether you're going to help her do it." Rob could hear his son thinking, weighing loyalties against reality. Michael had always been practical, driven by logic rather than emotion. It was why he'd succeeded in business, and why Rob still had hope for him. "What do you want me to do?" Michael finally asked. "I want you to choose a side and stick with it. No more playing diplomat. Either you're part of this family or you're not. And if I choose you, then you help me protect what we've built from people who want to tear it down. And if I choose Mom, then you move out with Rebecca and take whatever consequences come with that choice." Another long pause. "I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I'm changing the security codes and you'll be locked out too." As Rob hung up, he realized he felt lighter than he had in months. For too long, he'd been trying to hold together something that was already broken. Now he was finding out who was actually worth saving. His phone buzzed with a text from Sam Morrison. "Found something else. Troy's been asking around about construction loans and property development. Thinks he's going to use your house as collateral for some kind of business venture. Thought you should know." Rob stared at the message, his anger transforming into something colder and more calculating. Troy wasn't just planning to steal from him. He was planning to use Rob's own property as the foundation for his next con. But Troy had made one crucial error in his planning. He'd assumed that Rob Sullivan was just another mark, another middle-aged man too weak or too stupid to fight back effectively. Tomorrow, Troy Brennan was going to learn just how wrong that assumption was. And Rob was going to enjoy every minute of it. Chapter 4. The trap is set. Michael chose loyalty. He arrived at 6 a.m. with coffee and the grim expression of a man who'd spent the night reconsidering everything he thought he knew about his family. Rob had been awake for an hour, reviewing the files Sam Morrison had compiled on Troy Brennan's criminal history. "I called Mom last night," Michael said without preamble. "Asked her about Troy's background. And she hung up on me. Then called back an hour later, screaming about how you'd poisoned me against her, and how Troy was nothing like those other situations." Michael sat heavily in the kitchen chair. "She knew, Dad. She knew exactly who he was." Rob nodded. He'd expected as much. Linda had always been too intelligent to be an innocent victim. "What else?" "Rebecca's not speaking to me. Says I'm choosing money over family. But she's wrong. I'm choosing family over a con artist who's planning to steal everything you've worked for." It was the first time in days that Rob felt genuine pride in one of his children. Michael had chosen the harder path, the one that required acknowledging uncomfortable truths about his mother. "Good. Now I need to talk strategy." Rob spread the investigative files across the kitchen table. Photos of Troy with his previous marks, copies of police reports, financial records showing his pattern of targeting women with assets. Michael studied the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. "He's done this 4 times, that we know of." The 4th woman, Patricia Vance. Her husband fought back and got Troy sent to prison. But Troy learned from that experience. He's been more careful, more sophisticated in his approach. "So what's the plan?" Rob smiled, and Michael recognized the expression from his childhood, his father's face when he was about to show someone the consequences of underestimating him. "Troy thinks he's playing a game where he sets the rules. We're going to change the game." The first phase was information warfare. Rob had learned from 25 years in construction that knowledge was the most powerful tool in any conflict. Sam Morrison had provided the ammunition. Now Rob needed to deploy it strategically. He started with Linda's sister, Carol, who was hosting Linda and Troy while they looked for the perfect house. Carol had always been the weaker of the two sisters, eager to please and terrible at hiding her feelings. A single conversation would tell Rob everything he needed to know about their plans. Rob called Carol at her office. She managed a small insurance agency downtown and requested a meeting to discuss the situation like civilized adults. "Oh, Robert," Carol said, relief evident in her voice. "I'm so glad you called. This whole thing has been so difficult for everyone. Linda's been beside herself, and those poor children of Troy's. I'd like to meet today, if possible. Perhaps we can find a way to minimize the damage to everyone involved." Carol agreed immediately, eager to believe that her brother-in-law was ready to be reasonable. They arranged to meet at her office after hours, when they could speak privately. The conversation lasted exactly 27 minutes, and by the end, Rob knew everything. Linda and Troy had already toured 6 houses in the Pine Ridge area, all priced between $800,000 and $1.2 million. They planned to make an offer once Linda's divorce settlement came through. Troy had convinced Linda that the prenup could be challenged successfully, that any decent lawyer could find a way around it. More importantly, Troy had been filling Linda's head with stories about his consulting business and how they could leverage her settlement to build something amazing together. He'd shown her business plans for a property development company, with Linda's money providing the initial capital and Rob's house serving as their first acquisition and renovation project. "He's so ambitious," Carol gushed, "and he adores Linda. You should see how he treats her, like she's the most important woman in the world." "I'm sure he does," Rob replied. That evening, Rob called a meeting with his core team, Michael, Sam Morrison, and Danny Kowalski. They gathered in Rob's study, the same room where he'd planned every major construction project for the past 15 years. "Troy's timeline is based on one assumption," Rob began, "that Linda will receive a substantial settlement that can be liquidated quickly. We're going to make sure that assumption proves false." "How?" Michael asked. "By giving Troy exactly what he wants, but not in the way he expects to get it." Rob outlined his plan. It was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its execution. Troy wanted access to substantial assets quickly. Rob would provide that access, with conditions that would trap Troy in his own greed. "Phase 1, Rob explained, "we let Troy think he's winning. Linda's lawyer will be told that I'm willing to negotiate a settlement rather than fight the divorce in court. We'll offer Linda a buyout of her share of certain assets. Not the house, but enough liquid capital to make Troy think his plan is working." "How much?" Sam asked. $500,000. Michael whistled low. "That's a lot of money, Dad. It's a lot less than Troy thinks he's going to get. And it comes with strings attached." Rob explained the conditions he intended to attach to any settlement. The money would be held in escrow pending Linda's compliance with specific terms regarding disclosure of assets and future claims. More importantly, the settlement would include a clause requiring Linda to provide documentation of how the funds were being used. "Troy won't be able to access the money directly," Rob continued. "And if Linda uses it for anything other than her own legitimate expenses, the settlement is voided and I get the money back. That's assuming Troy doesn't just convince her to violate the terms," Danny pointed out. "He will convince her to violate the terms. That's what he does. And when he does, I'll have grounds for criminal charges, theft, fraud, conspiracy. Troy Brennan has spent time in prison before. He won't go back. And if that doesn't work?" Michael asked. Rob's smile turned cold. "Then we moved to Phase 2. He didn't elaborate on Phase 2, but Sam Morrison nodded approvingly. The ex-cop understood that some conversations were better left unspoken, that some plans required plausible deniability. The next morning, Rob called Gerald Hendricks and instructed him to reach out to Linda's attorney with a settlement offer. By noon, Linda herself was calling Rob's phone, her voice bright with triumphant satisfaction. "I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable about this," she said. "Troy always said you were too smart to let this get ugly." "Troy sounds like a wise man," Rob replied. "I'm looking forward to meeting him." "Really?" "Because he'd love to meet you too. He says he thinks you two would actually get along quite well under different circumstances." Rob almost laughed. Troy's confidence was breathtaking. The man actually thought he could charm his way into Rob's good graces while stealing his assets. "Why don't you both come by the house tomorrow evening?" Rob suggested. "We can discuss the details of the settlement like civilized adults." Linda agreed eagerly, probably imagining that she was about to witness her husband's capitulation. Rob hung up and immediately called Sam Morrison. "Tomorrow night, they're coming here. I want full audio and video recording of everything that happens." "Legal?" "No, but necessary." As Rob prepared for the confrontation, he thought about something his father had told him 30 years ago, back when Rob was just starting in construction. "Son, some people think being civilized means being weak. Those people are always surprised when civilization shows them its teeth." Troy Brennan was about to get a very educational introduction to Rob Sullivan's idea of civilization. Chapter 5. The Meeting. Troy Brennan was exactly what Rob had expected. Handsome in a practiced way, with the kind of smile that had probably been charming women since high school. He was tall but not as tall as Rob, well-dressed but in clothes that spoke of effort rather than substance. Most tellingly, his eyes were constantly moving, cataloging the house's features and calculating their value. "Robert," Troy said, extending his hand with confidence that bordered on arrogance. "I've heard so much about you. Linda speaks of you often." Rob shook the offered hand, noting the soft palms and manicured nails of a man who'd never done real work. "I'm sure she does. Please come in." Linda entered behind Troy, her arm linked through his in a display of possession that might have hurt Rob's feelings if he'd had any feelings left for her. She wore a new dress, something younger and tighter than her usual style, and her hair had been colored to hide the gray she'd been complaining about for years. "The house looks wonderful," she said, as if she'd been gone for months instead of a week. "You've been taking good care of it." "I always take care of what's mine," Rob replied, leading them to the living room. The furniture hadn't changed, but the atmosphere had. Michael sat in the corner chair, silent and watchful. Sam Morrison's recording equipment was hidden throughout the room, activated by the remote in Rob's pocket. Every word spoken in the next hour would be preserved for posterity. "Can I get anyone coffee?" "Wine?" Rob asked, playing the gracious host. "Wine would be lovely," Linda said, settling onto the couch beside Troy. "Remember that bottle of Cabernet we were saving? This seems like an appropriate occasion." Rob retrieved the wine, a $200 bottle he'd bought for their anniversary 2 years ago. As he poured, he watched Troy's eyes catalog the crystal glasses, the silver serving tray, the oil painting on the wall. Everything was being appraised, evaluated for its potential contribution to Troy's next score. "So," Rob said, raising his glass, "to new beginnings." They drank, and Troy leaned forward with the aggressive friendliness of a salesman moving in for the close. "Robert, I want you to know how much I respect what you've built here. Linda's told me about your business, your success. It's really impressive. And I want you to know that I have no intention of coming between you and your children or interfering with your relationship with Linda in any way that isn't necessary." "That's very considerate of you," Rob said. "Tell me about yourself, Troy. What line of work are you in?" Troy's smile brightened. "Consulting, primarily. Business development, strategic planning. I help people identify opportunities and maximize their potential returns on investment." "Sounds fascinating. Any current projects?" "Actually, yes. I'm putting together a property development venture. There's tremendous opportunity in this area. Undervalued properties, growing market demand. With the right initial capital, someone could build something really substantial." Rob nodded as if genuinely interested. "And you have experience in property development?" "Extensive experience. I've been involved in several successful projects over the years." Troy's confidence was building, fed by what he perceived as Rob's receptiveness. In fact, That's part of why I'm so excited about the future. Linda and I have been discussing how we might combine our resources to really make something happen. Our resources? Linda shifted uncomfortably, perhaps sensing that the conversation was heading into dangerous territory. Troy means the settlement money, of course. Once we work out the details. The settlement, Rob interrupted gently. Yes, let's talk about that. He retrieved a folder from the side table, the same folder that contained Troy's criminal history, though neither Linda nor Troy knew that yet. My lawyer has prepared an offer, Rob said, handing Linda a document. I think you'll find it quite generous. Linda scanned the papers, her eyes widening. $500,000, plus your personal belongings, your car, and ongoing health insurance for 2 years. I think that's fair compensation for someone who's contributed nothing to the marriage for the past year. Troy was reading over Linda's shoulder, and Rob could see the calculation in his eyes. $500,000 was enough to fund his next con, to rent a nice house and maintain the lifestyle that attracted his marks, to provide startup capital for whatever investment opportunity he planned to dangle in front of his next victim. This is very reasonable, Troy said, his voice warm with satisfaction. I told Linda you'd be fair about this. A man like you understands that sometimes marriages run their course, and the important thing is handling the transition with dignity. Absolutely, Rob agreed, though I notice you're reading Linda's settlement documents quite carefully for someone who's just a boyfriend. Troy's smile flickered for just a moment. I care about Linda's well-being. I want to make sure she's protected. How thoughtful. And I'm sure Linda appreciates having someone to help her make financial decisions. Someone with your extensive experience in property development. Rob, Linda said, warning in her voice. Let's not. Actually, I'm curious about your experience, Troy. What's the largest project you've worked on? Troy launched into a story about a shopping center in Savannah, describing his role in terms that sounded impressive but remained vague on specifics. Rob listened with apparent interest, occasionally asking questions that Troy answered with increasing confidence. That sounds like the Riverside Commons project, Rob said finally. I read about that in Construction Weekly. Wasn't the developer arrested for fraud? Troy's smile froze. I wasn't involved in the financial side of that project. Of course not. Just like you weren't involved in the financial side of Patricia Vance's house in Augusta. The room went silent. Linda looked confused, but Troy had gone pale. I'm sorry, Troy said carefully. Patricia Vance. Married 28 years. You convinced her to leave her husband, liquidate her assets for a property development opportunity. Sound familiar? Troy stood abruptly. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Sit down, Troy. The command in Rob's voice was unmistakable. Troy hesitated, looking toward the door, but Michael had moved to block that exit. Sam Morrison's training had been thorough. Never let a con artist control the room. What's going on? Linda demanded. Rob, what are you talking about? Rob opened his folder and spread photographs across the coffee table. Troy with Patricia Vance outside a real estate office. Troy with a woman in Atlanta, his arm around her as she signed documents. Police booking photos from Troy's arrest in Georgia. Your boyfriend is a career criminal. Linda, this is his 5th time running this exact con. He targets middle-aged women going through marital problems, convinces them to liquidate their assets, then disappears with the money. Linda stared at the photographs, her face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and finally understanding. Troy, Linda, this isn't what it looks like. Actually, it's exactly what it looks like, Rob continued. Troy Brennan, real name Troy Brenner, served 18 months in Georgia State Prison for elder fraud and extortion. He was released 14 months ago and immediately began looking for his next mark. That would be you, Linda. Troy was backing toward the window now, his charming mask finally slipping. You don't understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. You researched my wife, identified her vulnerabilities, then positioned yourself to exploit them. You've been planning to use her settlement money to fund your next venture, probably leaving her holding the bag when it inevitably collapses. That's not true, Troy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Of course it's true. It's your standard operating procedure. The only variation this time was targeting the house as well. You actually thought you could convince Linda to use my property as collateral for your fake development company. Linda was staring at Troy with growing horror. Is this true? Troy, tell me this isn't true. Troy looked at her, and for a moment, Rob thought he might actually try to maintain the deception. Then something shifted in his expression, and the mask came off completely. Does it matter? Troy asked, his voice cold now. You were already planning to leave him anyway. I just gave you the motivation and the plan to do it profitably. You used me. We used each other. You wanted out of your boring marriage to your boring husband. I provided an exit strategy. The fact that it would have benefited me, too, doesn't change the fact that you were a willing participant. Rob watched his wife's face as she realized the truth, not just about Troy, but about herself. She'd been so eager to believe in her grand romance that she'd ignored every warning sign, every inconsistency in Troy's story. Get out, she whispered. Linda, get out. Troy looked around the room, perhaps calculating whether he could still salvage something from the wreckage. But he was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and outmatched. With a final look of pure hatred directed at Rob, he walked to the door. This isn't over, he said. Rob smiled. Yes, it is. As Troy left, slamming the door behind him, Linda collapsed onto the couch, her face in her hands. For a moment, Rob felt something that might have been sympathy for the woman he'd once loved. Then he remembered the envelope, and the feeling passed. The settlement offer is withdrawn, he said quietly. You chose Troy over your family. Now you can live with the consequences of that choice. Linda looked up at him, mascara streaking her cheeks. Rob, please. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. As Linda left, taking nothing but her purse and her humiliation, Rob felt the satisfaction of a job well done. Phase 1 was complete. But Troy Brennan had made a mistake in his parting words. He'd suggested this wasn't over, which meant he was still thinking like a predator. It was time for Phase 2. Chapter 6, Hunting the Hunter. Troy Brennan made his first mistake 12 hours after leaving Rob's house. Sam Morrison called at 7 a.m. with the news. Your boy tried to break into Linda's sister's house last night. Carol caught him going through her desk, looking for financial documents. She called the police. Rob smiled as he poured his morning coffee. Charges filed. Attempted burglary. He's in county lockup until his hearing this afternoon. Bail set at $50,000. And Linda. Apparently she told the cops she'd never seen him before in her life. The irony was perfect. Linda, faced with the reality of Troy's criminal nature, had done exactly what Rob had expected, abandoned him the moment his usefulness ended. Troy, desperate to salvage something from his failed con, had made the amateur mistake of trying to steal what he couldn't obtain through manipulation. Where's Linda now? Still at Carol's place, but word is she's looking for somewhere else to stay. Carol doesn't want her there anymore, not after what happened. Rob hung up and called Michael. Feel like taking a road trip? Where to? Augusta, Georgia. I want to talk to Patricia Vance. The drive to Augusta took 4 hours, giving Rob time to explain his strategy to Michael. Patricia Vance had been Troy's third victim, the one whose husband had fought back successfully. If anyone understood Troy's methods and psychology, it would be her. They found Patricia working in her garden behind a modest but well-maintained house on a tree-lined street. She was a handsome woman in her 60s, with the kind of practical elegance that spoke of a life lived on her own terms. When Rob introduced himself and explained why he'd come, her expression shifted from wariness to understanding. Troy Brennan, she said, removing her gardening gloves. I haven't heard that name in 2 years. I was hoping I never would again. He targeted my wife, Rob explained. I managed to expose him before he got any money, but he's not finished trying. Patricia gestured toward chairs on her back porch. Coffee. As she prepared drinks, Patricia told her story. Troy had come into her life during a difficult period. Her marriage to Gerald had been strained by his retirement and her own feelings of invisibility. Troy had made her feel attractive and vital again, had convinced her that she deserved better than a boring life with a boring man. The terrible thing is that part of it was real, Patricia said. I was unhappy. Gerald and I had grown apart. Troy didn't create those feelings. He just exploited them. How did he convince you to leave? Slowly. First, He planted doubts about Gerald's commitment to me. Then he suggested that I deserved a chance to live my own life before it was too late. Finally, he presented this elaborate business plan for a property development venture that would give me financial independence and a fresh start. The parallels to Linda's situation were exact. Troy's playbook hadn't changed. What stopped you from going through with it? Patricia smiled, and Rob saw the steel beneath her gentle exterior. Gerald did. He'd been investigating Troy quietly, building a case. The night before I was supposed to sign the papers transferring my assets, Gerald presented me with everything he discovered. Troy's criminal history, his previous victims, the fact that his business plan was completely fictional. And you believed him? I wanted to believe Troy. But the evidence was overwhelming. Gerald had done his homework. Michael leaned forward. How did Troy react when you confronted him? Patricia's expression darkened. That's when I saw who he really was. The charm disappeared completely. He became vicious, threatening. Said I was a dried-up old woman who should be grateful for the attention he'd given me. Threatened to ruin my reputation if I didn't pay him for the emotional damage I'd caused him. What did Gerald do? Called the police and had Troy arrested for extortion. The threats were recorded. Gerald had been wearing a wire. Troy spent 18 months in prison, and we haven't seen him since. Rob absorbed this information, adding it to his understanding of Troy's psychology. The man was fundamentally a coward who relied on manipulation and intimidation when charm failed. But he was also vindictive, willing to lash out when cornered. There's something else you should know, Patricia continued. Troy doesn't give up easily. Even from prison, he tried to cause problems for us. Anonymous letters to Gerald's former colleagues, trying to damage his reputation. Phone calls to our children, spreading lies about their father. It went on for months. What stopped it? Patricia smiled grimly. Gerald paid Troy a visit in prison. I don't know exactly what was said, but the harassment stopped immediately. As they drove back to Millbrook, Michael was quiet, processing what they'd learned. Finally, he spoke. Troy's going to come after us, isn't he? After you specifically. Probably. Men like Troy don't handle humiliation well. And I didn't just expose him. I destroyed his most promising con in years. So what's the plan? Rob smiled, and Michael recognized his father's expression when he was about to show someone the consequences of threatening his family. We're going to do what Gerald Vance did. We're going to make Troy understand that some people are too dangerous to threaten. That evening, Rob called Danny Kowalski. I need to borrow some of your friends. Danny understood immediately. The blue-collar bar was more than just a drinking establishment. It was a gathering place for men who'd spent their lives doing hard work and who understood that sometimes problems required physical solutions. What kind of friends? The kind who understand that a man's family is sacred. The kind who don't like bullies who target women. How many friends? Enough to make an impression. Danny was quiet for a moment. This could get complicated, Rob. Troy Brennan has made his living destroying families for 5 years. He's going to keep doing it until someone stops him permanently. The law had its chance. He served 18 months and went right back to his old game. Sometimes the law isn't enough. And if something goes wrong, nothing's going to go wrong. We're just going to have a conversation with Troy about his future career plans. Danny laughed, a sound without humor. I'll make some calls. The next morning, Sam Morrison reported that Troy had made bail. He'd been released to the custody of a bail bondsman, with instructions to remain in the county pending trial. More importantly, he'd been asking questions about Rob's business, his daily routines, his home security. He's planning something, Sam warned. Question is whether it's another attempt at the money or something more personal. Let him plan, Rob said. I want to know exactly what kind of man we're dealing with. That afternoon, Troy made his second mistake. He approached Rebecca at her college campus, 3 hours away from Millbrook. Sam's contacts in campus security reported that Troy had tried to convince Rebecca that her father was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous to the family. When Rebecca called Rob that evening, her voice was shaking. Dad, there was a man here today. He said Mom was afraid you might hurt her. He said he was trying to protect her. What did you tell him? I told him to leave me alone. But Dad, he knew things. About where I live, about my class schedule. He's been watching me. Rob felt something cold and deadly settle in his chest. Troy just crossed the line from con artist to stalker, from financial predator to potential physical threat. And he'd targeted Rob's daughter. "Pack a bag," Rob said. "Michael's coming to get you. You're staying here until this is resolved." "Dad, I said some terrible things. Family protects family, Rebecca. No matter what else has happened, you're still my daughter." As Rob hung up, he realized that Troy had just given him exactly the justification he needed for what came next. No court in the country would blame a father for protecting his children from a convicted criminal who was stalking them. Troy Brennan wanted to play games with Rob Sullivan's family. It was time to teach him the rules. Chapter 7: The Reckoning. Troy Brennan was staying at the Millbrook Motor Lodge, a tired establishment on the edge of town that rented rooms by the week to people who had nowhere else to go. He'd paid cash for 7 days, telling the desk clerk he was in town settling some business matters. Rob knew this because Sam Morrison had followed Troy from the courthouse after his bail hearing. He knew Troy's room number, his routines, and the fact that he'd been making phone calls to his previous victims' families, apparently trying to gather information he could use as leverage. What Troy didn't know was that Rob and 5 of Danny's friends were sitting in a van in the motel parking lot, waiting for him to return from his evening visit to the bar down the street. "You sure about this, Rob?" asked Tommy Kowalski, Danny's nephew and a veteran of 3 tours in Afghanistan. "Once we go in there, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure." Rob checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. Troy would be back soon. Sam was watching from the bar, and he'd text when Troy left. The plan was simple. Troy would return to his room, where he'd find 6 men waiting to discuss his future plans. The conversation would be brief, direct, and final. Troy would understand that his time in Millbrook was over, and that any future contact with Rob's family would have severe consequences. Rob's phone buzzed. Sam's text. "On his way. 2 minutes." The men moved with the efficiency of people who'd done this kind of work before. Danny had chosen his friends well. Construction workers, mechanics, men who understood that sometimes problems required practical solutions. They positioned themselves outside Troy's room, waiting. Troy arrived precisely when expected, walking unsteadily from his evening's drinking. He was fumbling with his key when Rob stepped out of the shadows. "Hello, Troy." Troy spun around, his face cycling through surprise, fear, and then calculating anger. "What the hell are you doing here? We need to talk." "I've got nothing to say to you." "That's fine. I'll do the talking." Rob gestured, and the other men emerged from their positions. Troy found himself surrounded by 6 large, serious-looking men in a motel parking lot at midnight. The reality of his situation became clear quickly. "This is illegal," Troy said, his voice tight with fear. "You can't just—" "Can't what?" "Have a conversation." "I thought you liked conversations, Troy. You've been having them with my daughter, my wife, my family. Tonight it's my turn." Rob nodded toward the door. "Open it." Troy's hands shook as he unlocked the door. The motel room was exactly what Rob had expected. Cheap furniture, the smell of cigarettes and desperation, and evidence of Troy's growing desperation scattered across every surface. Financial documents, photographs of Rob's house, a notebook filled with observations about Rob's family and their routines. On the small table sat a laptop displaying Google searches for property law, inheritance disputes, and domestic violence reporting. "Planning something, Troy? I don't know what you're talking about." Rob picked up the notebook, flipping through pages of handwritten notes. Troy had documented Rebecca's class schedule, Linda's sister's work routine, even Michael's apartment address in the city. "You've been stalking my family. I've been protecting Linda from—" "From what?" "From me." Rob's voice was deadly quiet. "You convinced my wife to betray her family, try to steal my property, and now you're threatening my children. What exactly do you think I need protecting from?" Tommy Kowalski stepped closer to Troy, his military bearing unmistakable. "You know what we did to guys like you overseas? Guys who targeted families." Troy backed against the wall, his charm and confidence completely gone. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding. I never meant—" "You meant every bit of it," Rob interrupted. "This is what you do, Troy. You destroy families. But you made one crucial mistake." "What?" "You thought I was like your other victims. Weak, trusting, willing to let you walk away with a slap on the wrist. Rob pulled out his phone and played a recording, Troy's voice from the previous night, talking to someone on the phone about teaching that arrogant bastard a lesson and making him pay for humiliating me. Sam Morrison has been very thorough in documenting your activities. Phone calls, meetings, plans. You've been building a case against yourself, Troy. You're bluffing. Rob smiled. Am I? You try to break into Carol's house. You're stalking my daughter. You've made threatening phone calls. You're a convicted felon on bail, violating the terms of your release. How do you think that's going to play in court? The fight went out of Troy suddenly, his shoulders sagging as he realized the trap he'd walked into. What do you want? I want you gone. Tonight. Out of Millbrook, out of this county, out of this state. I want you to disappear so completely that my family never has to think about you again. And if I don't, then tomorrow morning, the police get copies of everything Sam has recorded. Your bail gets revoked, you go back to jail, and this time the charges include stalking, harassment, and violation of a restraining order that I'll have filed by noon. You can't. I can do whatever I want, Troy. I have money, I have evidence, and I have friends who don't like men who threaten families. You have nothing except a history of targeting women and a criminal record that no jury will overlook. Rob gestured to Danny's friends. These gentlemen have volunteered to escort you to the county line. I suggest you don't give them any trouble. Troy looked around the room, perhaps calculating whether he had any other options. But he was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and out of time. My stuff will be packed and shipped to whatever address you provide. You leave with what you're wearing. 20 minutes later, Rob watched Troy's car disappear into the darkness, followed at a discreet distance by Tommy Kowalski to ensure he actually left the county. It was over, or so Rob thought. The call came at 6 a.m. from Sam Morrison, his voice tight with concern. Rob, we've got a problem. Troy didn't leave the county. He doubled back, ditched his car, and he's missing. What do you mean missing? I mean he's gone aground. Could be anywhere. And Rob, Linda's missing too. Rob felt ice form in his stomach. Since when? Carol called the police an hour ago. Linda's bed wasn't slept in. Her car's still there, but she's gone. No sign of struggle, but her purse and phone are missing. Rob was already reaching for his clothes. Troy hadn't been intimidated. He'd been planning. And now he had Linda, either as an ally or as leverage. Call the police, Rob said. Report them both as dangerous. And Sam? Call Tommy and the others. This isn't over. As Rob hung up, he realized he'd made a crucial error. He'd assumed Troy would act rationally, that fear would override his vindictiveness. But Troy Brennan wasn't rational. He was a predator cornered and desperate desperate predators were always the most dangerous. Chapter 8, The Final Hunt. The abandoned Hartwell textile mill sat on 50 acres of industrial wasteland outside Millbrook, a monument to the town's faded manufacturing past. Rob knew the property well. His company had been hired 5 years ago to assess it for potential demolition before the project was scrapped due to environmental concerns. It was exactly the kind of place a desperate man might choose for a final confrontation. Sam Morrison had found Linda's car there at dawn, hidden behind the main building. Security cameras from a nearby truck stop had captured Troy forcing Linda into a stolen pickup truck at gunpoint 6 hours earlier. The police had been notified, but Sheriff Bradley had made it clear that his 2 deputies and handful of part-time officers weren't equipped for a hostage situation involving an armed ex-convict. State police are sending a negotiator, Sheriff Bradley told Rob as they stood in the mill's gravel parking lot. Should be here in 2 hours. In 2 hours, Troy could be in another state, Rob replied. Or Linda could be dead. Rob, I understand you're concerned, but we have protocols. Your protocols are going to get my wife killed. It was the first time Rob had called Linda his wife in over a week, and the words felt strange in his mouth. But regardless of what she'd done, regardless of their divorce, she was still the mother of his children, and she didn't deserve whatever Troy had planned. Sheriff Bradley's radio crackled. One of his deputies had found a break in the mill's perimeter fence, fresh footprints leading toward the main building. He's in there, Sam Morrison said quietly. Question is whether he's planning to negotiate or make a statement. Rob studied the massive brick structure, mentally cataloging what he remembered from his previous inspection. 5 stories, multiple entrances, dozens of rooms and corridors. Perfect for hiding, terrible for a coordinated search. What about phones? Rob asked. Has Troy tried to contact anyone? Nothing yet, but I've got his number monitored. If he makes a call, we'll know immediately. Rob's phone rang. Unknown number. Rob Sullivan. Hello, Robert. Troy's voice was calm, almost friendly. I think it's time we finished our conversation. Where's Linda? She's safe. For now. But her continued safety depends on your cooperation. What do you want? What I've always wanted. What you owe me for destroying my life. Rob gestured to Sam, who was already tracing the call. I don't owe you anything, Troy. You're a con artist who got caught. That's not my fault, isn't it? You had to play the hero, didn't you? Had to expose me, humiliate me, destroy my relationship with Linda. You couldn't just let her go. She was never yours to begin with. Troy's laugh was harsh, bitter. She came to me willingly, Robert. She wanted to leave you. I just gave her the courage to do it. By lying to her. By planning to steal her money. By offering her something better than a life married to a man who treated her like property. Rob forced himself to stay calm, to think tactically. Troy was talking, which meant he wanted something beyond simple revenge. What do you want, Troy? $2 million. Cash. And safe passage out of the state. You're insane. Linda's life is worth $2 million to you, isn't it? Or have you decided she's disposable too? The line went dead. Rob looked at Sam, who shook his head. Not enough time to trace the call. He's not negotiating, Rob said. He's stalling. For what? Time to plan his exit strategy. Troy's a coward and a predator, but he's not stupid. He knows this ends badly for him unless he can find a way to disappear with some kind of payout. Sheriff Bradley approached, his radio chattering with updates. State police negotiator is 30 minutes out. Tactical team is an hour behind him. Too long, Rob said. We need to move now. Rob, you can't just. He has my wife in a building I know better than anyone. My construction crew did a complete inspection of that place. I know every entrance, every exit, every structural weakness. It's too dangerous. Rob looked at the sheriff, at Sam, at the two deputies standing nearby. Good men, but not equipped for this kind of situation. Troy had chosen his ground well, isolated, defensible, with multiple escape routes. Danny, Rob called to his friend, who'd been standing quietly with 3 of his men. You still got those tools in your truck? What kind of tools? The kind that open locked doors without keys. Danny smiled grimly. Always. 30 minutes later, Rob moved through the mill's basement, Danny behind him, both men wearing the kind of tactical gear that Danny's military friend had acquired over the years. Sam Morrison was coordinating with the sheriff's department, feeding them intelligence from security cameras they'd managed to tap into. The mill's basement was a maze of pipes and machinery, perfect for moving unseen. Rob's flashlight cut through the darkness as he navigated toward the building's central stairwell, following the layout he remembered from his inspection. His radio crackled softly. Sam's voice, movement on the 3rd floor. West side, 2 figures. Rob acknowledged and changed direction, heading for the service stairs he'd identified earlier. The building was silent except for the distant sound of machinery from a still operating plant half a mile away. He found them in what had once been the mill's main production floor, a vast space filled with abandoned machinery and broken windows that let in the gray morning light. Troy had Linda seated on a wooden crate, her hands bound behind her back, her mouth taped. She was alive, conscious, and clearly terrified. Troy stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, the other holding a pistol that looked military in design. Robert, Troy called when he saw Rob emerge from the stairwell. Right on time. Let her go, Troy. You want to punish someone? Punish me. Oh, I intend to. But Linda's part of this too. She's the one who chose to leave her family for me. She's the one who was willing to steal from you to fund our new life together. She was your victim. Was she? Or was she a willing participant who got cold feet when things got complicated? Rob moved closer, his hands visible but ready. 20 feet away, he could see Linda's eyes over the tape, wide with fear, but also with something else, shame, perhaps, or recognition of how completely she'd been played. What's your exit strategy, Troy? Even if I give you money, even if you get out of here, you're finished. Your face is on every news report in 3 states. Your criminal history is public. You'll never be able to run this con again. Then I'll find a new line of work. Men like you don't change, Troy. You'll always be a predator. Maybe, but I'll be a rich predator. Troy shifted position, and Rob saw his opportunity. The man was holding the gun casually, his attention divided between Rob and Linda. Amateur mistake. Danny's voice came through Rob's earpiece. Clear shot from the west window. Say the word. Rob almost gave the order. But Linda was too close, the angle too risky. You know what your real mistake was, Troy? Rob said, moving incrementally closer. Enlighten me. You never understood what you were really stealing. You thought it was about money, about property, but you were stealing something much more valuable, which was trust, family, the things that can't be replaced once they're broken. Troy's grip on the gun tightened. Spare me the sentiment, Robert. You want a wife back? Transfer $2 million to the account number I'm about to give you. I don't have $2 million in liquid assets. Then liquidate something. Sell your precious house. Mortgage your business. Prove that your family actually means something to you. Rob smiled, and Troy must have seen something in his expression that he didn't like, because he took a step back. You know what the funny thing is, Troy? You're absolutely right. Family does mean something to me. It means everything, which is why I'm going to make sure you never threaten another family again. Troy started to respond, but Danny's shot from the west window took him in the shoulder, spinning him away from Linda and sending the gun skittering across the concrete floor. Rob was moving before Troy hit the ground, covering the distance in seconds. The con artist was wounded but still conscious, clutching his shoulder and cursing. It's over, Troy. Go to hell. Rob knelt beside Linda, cutting her bonds and removing the tape from her mouth. She gasped, tears streaming down her face. Rob, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant. Save it for later, Rob said, but not unkindly. Are you hurt? She shook her head, and Rob helped her to her feet as sirens wailed in the distance. The state police had finally arrived, along with paramedics and enough firepower to handle any situation. As they led Troy away on a stretcher, the man's eyes found Rob one last time. This isn't justice, Troy said. This is revenge. Rob nodded. Sometimes they're the same thing. Chapter 9. New Foundations. 6 months later, Rob sat in his study, reviewing the final divorce papers. Linda had agreed to the original settlement terms. No property, no ongoing support, just enough money to start over somewhere else. She'd taken a job in Charlotte, working for a friend's marketing company, trying to rebuild her life far from the wreckage she'd created in Millbrook. Troy Brennan was serving a 10-year sentence for kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and violation of his parole. During his trial, 3 more victims had come forward, women from other states who'd been too ashamed to report his crimes. Troy would be an old man before he saw freedom again. Rebecca had moved back home after graduating from college, humbled by her experience and determined to repair her relationship with her father. She was working for Sullivan Construction now, learning the business from the ground up, proving that she understood the value of earning rather than inheriting. Michael had been promoted to project manager, his loyalty during the crisis earning him Rob's complete trust. Father and son worked together daily now, planning the future of the company and the family legacy. The doorbell rang, interrupting Rob's thoughts. He opened the door to find Patricia Vance and her husband Gerald, both smiling warmly. We were passing through on our way to visit our daughter in Raleigh, Patricia explained. Thought we'd stop and see how you were doing. Rob invited them in, grateful for the company. Over coffee, Patricia and Gerald shared updates about their life, how they'd used their experience with Troy to help other families who'd been targeted by con artists, how their marriage had grown stronger through the ordeal. The terrible thing is that men like Troy prey on real problems, Patricia said. Gerald and I were having difficulties. I was unhappy. Troy didn't create those feelings. He just exploited them. But we learned something important, Gerald added. Marriage isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every day despite the problems. Rob nodded, thinking about Linda. Her betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed something crucial, that their marriage had been built on convenience rather than commitment, comfort rather than love. Do you regret how it ended? Patricia asked gently. No, Rob said, surprising himself with the certainty of his answer. Linda made her choice when she chose Troy over her family. I just made sure she lived with the consequences of that choice. And your children? They learned something valuable about loyalty, about the difference between forgiveness and enabling. Rebecca understands now that actions have consequences. Michael never forgot. After the Van Cess left, Rob walked through his house, seeing it with new eyes. The silence that had once felt empty now felt peaceful. The spaces Linda had occupied were being filled with new memories. Family dinners with his children, business meetings with his team, quiet evenings when he could think and plan without the underlying tension that had marked his marriage. His phone rang. Rebecca's voice, excited and proud. "Dad, you need to see the Riverside project. We finished the foundation work this morning, and it's perfect. Absolutely perfect." Rob smiled. "I'll be right there." As he drove through Millbrook's familiar streets, Rob reflected on the events of the past year. He learned that some people would always choose the easy path over the right one, that loyalty was rarer and more valuable than he'd realized, and that sometimes destroying something broken was the only way to build something stronger. Troy Brennan had tried to steal more than money. He'd tried to steal the foundation of Rob's life. But foundations, when properly built, were designed to withstand any assault. Rob had spent 25 years building his life on what he thought was solid ground, only to discover it was quicksand. But now, for the first time in years, he was building on bedrock, loyalty, integrity, and the understanding that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. At the construction site, Rebecca was waiting with the rest of the crew, her hard hat slightly askew, her smile brilliant with accomplishment. She'd earned her place here, proven herself worthy of the Sullivan name. "Look at this, Dad," she said, gesturing to the perfectly level foundation. "It's going to last forever." Rob put his arm around his daughter's shoulders and looked at what they'd built together. Not just concrete and steel, but trust, respect, and the kind of bond that could survive any storm. "Yes," he said, "it is." Some men spent their lives building castles on sand, wondering why everything they touched eventually crumbled. Rob Sullivan had learned the harder truth, that lasting foundations required bedrock, and bedrock was only found after everything soft and false had been stripped away. He'd lost a wife and gained a family. He'd lost his illusions and gained his integrity. In the end, it was a trade he'd make again without hesitation. The foundation was solid now. Whatever came next would be built to last. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.